They said the human body could survive almost anything until her body proved them wrong. The year was 1873, and in the dim gaslight of a Massachusetts hospital, doctors stood frozen around a single bed. A woman lay there, motionless yet wrong, not in the way a sick person looks wrong, but in the way nature itself recoils from something that should not exist. Her skin was pale as bone dust, stretched thin across veins that seemed to move beneath the surface. The nurses whispered she could hear every word, even in her final hour, that she blinked when they spoke of God, but not when they spoke of science. Her name was Evelyn Hartwell, 23 years old, a quiet librarian's daughter who became the most disturbing case in medical history. When her body was delivered to the morgue, the coroner refused to open it. He'd seen soldiers torn apart by cannon fire, sailors drowned and bloated by the sea. But this was something else. He sealed the report, wrote a single line across the file, and locked it in an iron drawer, unfit for autopsy. The drawer, they say, was never opened again. Years later, when the hospital was torn down, a student from the new medical college found that drawer buried in the rubble. Inside, still intact, was the Hartwell file, and alongside it, a photograph no one was supposed to see. In it, Evelyn's body had been partially dissected, and yet her eyes were open, wide, a wet glimmer, almost alive. Beneath her ribs, the organs were fused: heart, liver, and lungs, grown together into one grotesque mass, pulsing faintly under the lamplight. What the doctors discovered that night would never be published. Not in any medical journal, not in any history of the Victorian age. But the truth, what they called the Hartwell formation, spread through whispers among surgeons and scholars for generations. A body that refused to die. A body that rewrote its own anatomy in defiance of God. And in the end, the question that lingered in every mind wasn't how Evelyn Hartwell lived, but what she became. They traced Evelyn's story back through parish records, birth registries, and the brittle pages of forgotten letters. The deeper they dug, the more the lines blurred between medicine and something far older, something that didn't belong in hospitals or holy places. Her parents, Jonathan and Miriam Hartwell, were quiet people, known in town for their reclusive habits. They lived on the outskirts of Boston in a manner that locals claimed was built on cursed soil. A parcel once owned by a colonial physician accused of grave robbing. It was said that the doctor had been hanged in 1692, his property sealed under church order. No one was ever supposed to live there again. And yet, nearly 2 centuries later, the Hartwells moved in. From the start, there were rumors. A midwife who delivered Evelyn said the baby didn't cry for the first 3 days of her life, just stared unblinking, with eyes too dark for an infant. A childhood friend later recalled that Evelyn never seemed to age like other children. When she was 10, she looked nearly 20, and when she reached 23, the year of her death, she looked exactly the same, her skin flawless, her hair untouched by time, a beauty that seemed to haunt rather than inspire. When doctors later examined the house, they found journals hidden in the attic. Jonathan Hartwell's writings. His notes spoke not of love for his daughter, but of obsession. He called her the vessel, the experiment, and the cure. In one passage, dated 1857, he wrote, "The blood of the mother carries the error. The child will correct it." No one knew what error he meant. Some speculated a hereditary disease. Others whispered of something more, an ancient ritual cloaked in medical language, carried out by a man who believed he could perfect humanity through his own flesh and blood. When Evelyn's health began to fail, the townsfolk said the house glowed faintly at night, pale light seeping from the cracks between its boards, pulsing like breath. Her mother was never seen again after that winter. Jonathan, too, vanished a month before Evelyn's body was taken to the hospital. The only thing found of him was a lock of hair, Evelyn's, clenched in his dead hand, deep beneath the basement floor. And yet, the autopsy revealed something even more terrifying, because the DNA in that fused mass inside Evelyn's chest wasn't all human. The doctors who first examined the tissue thought it was a contamination, a laboratory mistake. Victorian medicine, after all, was primitive by today's standards. But even by those crude methods, something didn't fit. The cells didn't behave like any known human organ. They multiplied without limit, even after death. The tissue didn't rot. When exposed to air, it shimmered faintly, as though reflecting light from beneath the skin. The chief pathologist, Dr. Alcott Reeves, kept a sample locked in his private cabinet. He told his colleagues he intended to study it, but months later, he began to deteriorate. Witnesses said his pupils turned cloudy, his voice grew hollow, and the flesh of his hands, once steady and precise, began to peel away in translucent layers. He was found one morning collapsed over his desk, eyes open, mouth full of ash. The drawer containing the tissue sample was empty. No one ever found it again. What survived, however, were his notes. They were written in a frenzy, pages stained with what appeared to be blood and ink mixed together. He described dreams, visions of a woman's body unfolding like a flower, revealing something metallic beneath the skin. He wrote that the tissue spoke to him, not in words, but in impulses, a pull to understand what Evelyn had become. The final line of his journal read, "She is no longer human. She is the correction." Years later, modern historians uncovered these writings and dismissed them as madness. But one detail keeps resurfacing. Every medical student who handled the Hartwell documents reported the same physical reaction, a faint buzzing in the ears, a feeling of warmth behind the eyes, and a metallic taste on the tongue. Theories emerged, some scientific, others occult. One claimed Evelyn's body represented a rare form of chimerism, where two genetic codes fused into one. Another claimed she was part of a forgotten experiment, an attempt to re-engineer the human body to survive any disease. But the most disturbing theory came from a psychiatrist in 1903. He suggested the Hartwells had stumbled upon something beyond medicine altogether, an evolutionary mutation triggered not by infection, but by intection. A body that changed because someone wanted it to. And if that were true, then Evelyn Hartwell wasn't a victim of biology. She was its architect. In 1910, nearly 40 years after Evelyn's death, a young anatomist named Clara Baines stumbled across her case file in the Harvard Medical Archive. The folder was sealed under a false name, E. Harland, but the handwriting on the cover matched Dr. Reeves. Clara had heard rumors of the case, spoken only in the margins of textbooks and the whispers of old surgeons who'd trained under him. She thought it was myth, until she saw the photograph, the same one that chilled generations before her. She became obsessed. For months, she tried to reconstruct Evelyn's condition from the scraps of surviving notes. But what unsettled her most wasn't the anatomy, it was the language. Reeves, Jonathan Hartwell, even the nurses described Evelyn not as a patient, but as a process. Something incomplete. Something still becoming. Clara wrote in her journal that she began to dream of Evelyn, not as a corpse, but as a shape moving beneath the skin of her own reflection. She saw her in mirrors, in the corner of surgical theaters, in the surface of water. She confided to a colleague that she'd started waking with bruises on her chest, right where the fused organs had been described. He laughed. 2 weeks later, she stopped coming to work. When authorities entered her boarding room, they found the walls covered in anatomical sketches. Dozens of them, all of the same woman. The faces changed slightly from page to page, like a sequence of evolution, until the last one no longer looked human at all. A note pinned to the final drawing read, "It's still growing." In her sink lay something floating in a basin of formalin. Tissue, pale and glistening. Tests later confirmed what no one wanted to believe. The DNA was a partial match to the preserved sample once belonging to Evelyn Hartwell, the same cell structure, the same resistance to decay, but it was alive, dividing, multiplying. After that discovery, the Hartwell case vanished from academic record. The hospital burned in 1912 under unknown circumstances. Every surviving photograph was confiscated by federal investigators who never released their findings. All that remained was rumor, that somewhere beneath the rebuilt foundations, the earth itself still pulses faintly, as if something beneath it still remembers. Over the decades, fragments of the Hartwell story resurfaced, always quietly, always with consequences. In the 1940s, a physician at Massachusetts General reportedly found a jar mislabeled in the pathology basement, a pale organ mass preserved in cloudy fluid. He opened it, and within weeks he was dead from a systemic infection no antibiotic could touch. In the autopsy, his organs showed the same fusions as Evelyn's. The report was sealed again under government order. By the 1960s, whispers of Project Hartwell began circulating in military medical circles. Files hinted at covert research into tissue regeneration, experiments meant to engineer soldiers who could heal from any wound. But the results were never public. Those who worked on it signed lifelong non-disclosure agreements, and those who didn't disappeared. One retired surgeon in an interview before his death said something that still haunts researchers today. He said, "We didn't discover the Hartwell formation. We inherited it." When asked what he meant, he refused to elaborate, only adding that the body wasn't the important part. The idea that evolution could be forced, that the human form could be rewritten if enough pain, obsession, and will were applied. Decades later, a journalist named Michael Arden tried to trace the bloodline. Through public archives and DNA records, he found something chilling. The Hartwell name had vanished from official documents after 1873, but its genetic markers hadn't. In fact, descendants could still be traced to small towns along the eastern seaboard. People with uncanny health, perfect skin, and an aversion to hospitals. People who never aged quite right. Arden tried to publish his findings in 1998. Before he could, he was found in his car on the outskirts of Salem. The engine was running, the tape recorder still spinning. His last words were faint, distorted by static. "She's still here. She never stopped changing." No one ever located the tapes, but the family trees he compiled remain archived online, though some pages have been quietly deleted over the years. And in every photograph of the Hartwell descendants, one detail remains the same: the eyes. Unnaturally dark, like mirrors without reflection. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? Would you try to escape it or see how far it could go? There are those who believe the Hartwell story ended long ago, a Victorian nightmare buried under dust and superstition. But history has a way of breathing through the cracks we pretend not to see. In 2011, during a renovation of the old Lowell District Asylum, workers uncovered a sealed brick chamber beneath the east wing. Inside were rusted medical instruments, broken jars, and a single iron table bolted to the floor. The walls were lined with names carved in a patient's trembling hand. One of them unmistakably read E. Hartwell. The discovery never made the news. The construction halted for 3 weeks under the pretext of structural hazards. But a whistleblower later leaked photos to an underground forum dedicated to lost medical archives. Among them was a blurry image of something that shouldn't exist. A body, small as a child's, curled on the table in a fetal position, covered in a translucent membrane. The skin was almost transparent, veins moving beneath like threads of silver. When the photo was analyzed, experts noticed something impossible. The timestamp showed the body had shifted position between frames. No official report was filed. The asylum was demolished the next year. The site remains empty, fenced off, owned by a private medical trust. Some say the trust is connected to a modern biotech company, one that specializes in genetic longevity research, Hartwell Laboratories. Its founder, Dr. Miriam Lowe, has no recorded family history before 1999. Yet her DNA sequence, revealed in a leaked patent document, contains a signature nearly identical to the preserved Hartwell tissue, the same anomaly, the same unnatural fusion. Whether by science or something far older, the Hartwell bloodline endures in the quiet persistence of its design. Those who study it say the mutation no longer destroys its hosts, it adapts, perfects, evolves. If that's true, then Evelyn's transformation wasn't a curse at all. It was a beginning. A seed planted in human flesh more than a century ago, now blooming in ways we can't yet see. And if the rumors are true, that the bodies buried beneath the old asylum still move when the earth warms, then maybe the question isn't who Evelyn Hartwell was, but who she is now. They say every century leaves behind a ghost, not the kind that haunts corridors, but the kind that lives inside blood, memory, and silence. The Hartwell case is one such ghost. It lingers in every story we tell about progress, every experiment that crosses the line between healing and horror. The deeper historians dig, the more they find the same pattern: documents missing from archives, autopsy reports burned, photographs erased from public record, almost as if history itself is trying to forget her. But what if forgetting isn't possible anymore? In 2023, a medical researcher from Maryland uploaded a paper to a closed database titled Autogenic Tissue Integration, Revisiting Historical Anomalies. Within 12 hours, the paper vanished. Those who saw it described references to a Hartwell sequence, a genetic pattern capable of rewriting organic tissue without external intervention. According to the notes, the sequence wasn't artificial. It was inherited, passed silently from generation to generation, dormant until awakened by stress, trauma, or grief. Think about that for a moment. The idea that pain itself could reshape the body, that suffering could carve evolution into our bones. That's what Jonathan Hartwell might have discovered all those years ago. Not immortality, but a way to survive everything, even death, by becoming something else. And perhaps that's why the story still matters. Because if Evelyn's transformation was real, if she truly became the correction her father envisioned, then she isn't gone. She's diffused, diluted through time, hiding in plain sight. Maybe she's in the blood of someone who never gets sick, whose scars vanish overnight. Maybe she's in the eyes of a stranger on the street who doesn't seem to blink. Maybe, without knowing it, she's in you. As the lights dim and the story closes, remember, history is not a collection of facts. It's a living organism, changing, mutating, remembering. The Hartwell file may be sealed, but the body it described never was. Somewhere in the dark between science and myth, it's still moving, still adapting, still waiting. And if you ever find yourself near Boston, where the old hospital once stood, listen closely. Some nights, when the fog drifts low and the wind carries the scent of formalin and dust, you can hear it breathing,